My house is suddenly shrinking? I hit my head on the kitchen doorway and stood there stunned because I'd lived here for 10 years and never come close to hitting that doorway before. You okay? My wife Kelly asked from the living room. The doorway, I said, rubbing my head. It's lower. She came over and walked through it normally. Seems fine to me, she said. Maybe you're having a growth spurt at 35. But I knew something was wrong. I had to duck slightly now when before I'd walked through without thinking. But Kelly didn't see it, and I trusted her. So at first I believed her that I was the problem. First thing I did was check for carbon monoxide. I bought 3 detectors and put them all over the house. Every reading came back normal. The furnace was fine, the water heater was fine, everything was fine, except the ceilings felt lower. Next, I measured myself at the doctor's office. Maybe I'd changed size, not the house. But I was the same height I'd been since college. Kelly was making dinner when I got home and she had to squeeze past me in the kitchen. I watched her move through the kitchen easily while I kept bumping into things. The counter, the island, the table, everything was in my way. She never bumped into anything. That night I woke up to use the bathroom and walked straight into the doorframe in the dark, hard enough to split my lip. Kelly turned on the light and there was blood on the white paint. Jesus, what happened? She asked. The doorframe moved, I said. Doorframes don't move, she said, getting me a tissue. You're exhausted. When's the last time you slept properly? But I saw something in her eyes when she said it, a flicker of something that wasn't concern. Or maybe I imagined it. I started measuring things in secret, not writing it down where she could find it but keeping track in my head. The hallway was narrower. The shower stall was tighter. The garage was lower. Every day something changed but Kelly never noticed, or said she didn't notice. My brother Tom came over and immediately hit his head on the basement ceiling. What the hell? He said. Since when is this so low? See? I told Kelly. Tom notices it too. Tom's drunk, she said, even though he'd had 1 beer. And you're encouraging each other's paranoia. After Tom left, I found Kelly in the basement with a tape measure. She shoved it in her pocket when she saw me. What were you doing? I asked. Nothing, she said, looking for the Christmas decorations. It was July. I installed a hidden camera without telling her, aimed at the hallway. For 3 nights, nothing happened. On the 4th night, the footage showed Kelly standing in the hallway at 3 a.m., just staring at the walls. She stood there for an hour not moving, then went back to bed. When I asked her about it, she said she'd never gotten up. I have the footage, I said. Show me, she said. But the file was corrupted. Every file from that night was corrupted. She said I must have dreamed it, but I knew what I'd seen. She'd been measuring the walls with her hands, touching them like she was checking something. I started sleeping on the couch because the bedroom made me claustrophobic. Kelly said I was having a breakdown and needed help. She made me a doctor's appointment I didn't go to. She started putting pills in my coffee that I pretended to swallow. Then I got stuck in the bathroom. Actually stuck. I'd gone in fine, but when I tried to leave, my shoulders were wedged in the doorframe. I had to dislocate something to get out, and Kelly was standing in the hallway watching. Help me, I said. There's nothing wrong with the door, she said. You're doing this to yourself. That's when I knew. The calm way she said it, the way she watched me struggle. She was doing this somehow. She had to be. It's you, I said. You're doing this to the house. That's insane, she said. You come from a construction family, I said. Your dad's a contractor. You know how to make modifications. To make rooms smaller? She laughed. While you're sleeping? That's your theory? But I started noticing things. Drywall dust in the vacuum. Her clothes smelling like sawdust. Tools in her car she said were for work, but she worked in marketing. Late-night phone calls she took in the garage. Why are you doing this to me? I asked one night. I'm not doing anything, she said. You're sick. Then explain the dust, I said. Explain the tools. What tools? She asked. I went to her car, but they were gone. Everything was gone. She stood in the doorway watching me search, that same flicker in her eyes from before. Not concern, satisfaction. You need help, she said. I barricaded myself in the living room that night, pushed the couch against the door so she couldn't get in to make more changes. But in the morning, the doorway was so narrow, I had to remove the couch to squeeze through. Kelly was in the kitchen making breakfast like nothing was wrong. I know it's you, I said. Why would I shrink our house? She exploded. To make me think I'm crazy, I said. To get rid of me. You probably have life insurance or a boyfriend or something. She looked at me with what seemed like genuine fear, but I didn't believe it anymore. I didn't believe anything she said or did. The house was getting smaller, and she was the only one who could have done it. I'm calling your sister, she said, reaching for her phone. I grabbed it from her hand. You're not calling anyone. That's when she ran. Out the front door that I could barely fit through anymore. And I stood in my shrinking house wondering if I should follow her or if that's exactly what she wanted. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and I pulled it out with shaking hands. A text from Donovan asking if I was okay after yesterday. I stared at it because I hadn't talked to Donovan yesterday, unless he meant something else, unless Kelly had called him. My fingers hovered over the screen, and then I called Jillian instead, because she was the only person I could trust right now. She answered on the second ring, and I started talking before she could say hello, words spilling out about the doorways getting smaller. And Kelly, with the tape measure at 3 in the morning, and the corrupted camera files and getting stuck in the bathroom doorway while she just watched. Jillian didn't interrupt, didn't tell me I was crazy, just listened to everything until I ran out of breath. She asked where Kelly was now, and I said she ran out, went to her parents probably. Jillian said she was coming over tonight and I shouldn't be alone, that this sounded serious, and we needed to figure out what was actually happening. I thanked her and hung up and looked around my house that felt like it was squeezing me. I pulled out my phone again and started taking pictures. Every doorway, every hallway, every room I could fit into. I held the phone steady and made sure the timestamps showed, creating a record of what the house looked like right now in case it changed again tonight. The camera clicked over and over as I moved through the kitchen doorway, the bathroom doorway, the bedroom doorway that all felt too narrow. I photographed the basement stairs where the ceiling seemed lower than it should be, the garage where I had to duck now when I never did before. Building evidence made me feel slightly less insane, like I was doing something concrete instead of just panicking. I spent 2 hours documenting everything, taking measurements with a tape measure I found in the junk drawer, writing numbers on my phone notes app. The front door opened and I jumped, but it was just Jillian with an overnight bag slung over her shoulder. She walked straight to the kitchen doorway, and I watched her move through it normally. Then she turned around and walked through again, this time paying attention. Her head smacked into the top of the frame, and she swore and grabbed her forehead. She looked at me with wide eyes and touched the doorframe like she couldn't believe it. She said something was definitely off about the measurements here, that she'd walked through this doorway 100 times and never hit her head before. We sat at the kitchen table and she pulled out her tablet, opened a notes app, and asked me to tell her everything from the beginning in order. I walked through the whole timeline, starting with the first time I hit my head, the carbon monoxide detectors, measuring myself at the doctor, Kelly dismissing everything. When I got to the part about Kelly's late-night phone calls and the tools in her car that disappeared, Jillian's face changed from concerned to something darker. She asked if I still had the photos of the tools, and I said no, they were gone before I could document them. She typed notes quickly, asking specific questions about dates and times, about what Kelly said versus what she did. Then she stopped me and said we needed objective data before jumping to conclusions about Kelly's involvement, that we couldn't just assume the worst without proof. She reached into her bag and pulled out a laser level, the kind contractors use, and said we should install proper measurement markers so we'd know for sure if anything changed. We spent the next hour going through the house together, using the laser level to mark exact measurements of every doorway and hallway. Jillian showed me how to make tiny pencil marks behind the trim where they wouldn't be obvious, marking the precise height and width of each opening. She documented everything on her tablet with photos and measurements, creating a baseline we could check against tomorrow. The work felt good, methodical, and scientific instead of paranoid. When we finished, it was getting dark, and Jillian said she'd take the guest room while I slept on the couch like I'd been doing. I lay there in the dark, listening to the house settle and creak, every sound making me tense. Around midnight, I woke up convinced I heard sawing, a rhythmic back-and-forth sound coming from somewhere in the walls. I got up and checked every room but found nothing, just Jillian sleeping peacefully in the guest room. I went back to the couch and lay there staring at the ceiling. 2 hours later, I woke again to what sounded like drilling, a high-pitched whine that stopped as soon as I sat up. I walked through the house again, checking the garage, the basement, even outside, but everything was quiet and still. The third time I woke up, I didn't hear anything. I just felt convinced that something had changed while I was sleeping. I checked the measurement markers in the dark using my phone flashlight, but couldn't tell if they'd moved. I started wondering if my mind was creating evidence to support my theory about Kelly, if I was so invested in the idea that she was doing this that I was imagining sounds that weren't there. Morning light came through the windows, and I found Jillian already up, checking our measurement markers with the laser level. She showed me the readings on her tablet, and they matched exactly what we'd marked last night. Nothing had changed, not a single millimeter. I should have felt relieved, but instead, I felt confused and frustrated, because if the house wasn't actively shrinking, why did I keep hitting my head and bumping into things that never bothered me before? Jillian made coffee and said she had a friend who was a structural engineer, someone named Alexia, who could come do a walk through this afternoon if I wanted an expert opinion. I agreed, even though part of me worried what we'd find, whether it would prove I was right or prove I was losing it. Kelly still hadn't called or texted, and I didn't know if I should reach out or give her space, if contacting her would make things better or worse. I picked up my phone to check and saw Kelly had posted on social media from her parents' house, a casual photo of their golden retriever that felt completely surreal given what had happened yesterday, like nothing was wrong, like she hadn't just run out of our house in fear. I stared at the photo, trying to understand how she could post something so normal right now. Jillian saw me staring at the screen and gently took my phone away, setting it face down on the counter. She said I needed to focus on facts right now, not social media clues, that scrolling through Kelly's posts would just make me spiral into worse theories. Alexia showed up around 2 in the afternoon with a black rolling case that looked like it weighed more than I did. She was maybe 40, wearing jeans and a polo shirt with some engineering company logo on it, and she got right to work without much small talk. She pulled out a laser level first and started checking door frames, making marks with a pencil on a little pad. Then she moved to a tool that looked like a fancy stud finder but bigger, running it along walls and writing down numbers I didn't understand. I followed her around the house, trying not to hover but needing to see what she was finding. Jillian stayed in the kitchen, giving us space, but I could feel her watching. Alexia asked when we bought the house, and I told her 10 years ago, asked if we'd noticed any cracks, and I said no, but Kelly might have. She didn't react to that, just kept measuring and photographing with a tablet mounted on a tripod. She spent forever in the basement, tapping the walls and looking at the floor joists with a flashlight. I wanted to ask what she was seeing, but her face stayed neutral and professional the whole time. After almost 2 hours, she packed up her equipment and asked us to sit down at the kitchen table. She pulled up photos on her tablet showing door frames that weren't quite straight, measurements that were off by small amounts. She said several frames were out of plumb, which meant not perfectly vertical, and there was settling in the foundation, probably from water pooling around the house during heavy rain, she explained, which over time can make foundations shift and heave. The changes were real, but measured in millimeters, not the inches or feet it felt like to me. Doors would stick and bind as frames shifted, making spaces feel tighter even though the actual room size hadn't changed much. I sat there processing this and felt relief mixed with something like disappointment because her explanation made sense, but didn't match how dramatic everything felt. The doorway that split my lip, the bathroom I got stuck in, all of it felt massive, and now she was saying it was millimeters. Jillian asked if stress could make someone more aware of small changes, and Alexia nodded immediately. She said, hypervigilance absolutely amplifies perception of physical changes, that someone constantly checking and measuring would notice things most people walk past every day. She talked about confirmation bias too, how once you believe something is happening, you start finding evidence everywhere, even in normal variations. I wanted to argue, but I was exhausted, and some part of me that had been wound tight for weeks started to loosen just a little. After Alexia left with a promise to email a full report, Jillian sat me down on the couch and said we needed to talk about something hard. She said it was possible both things were true at the same time, that the house had real structural problems, and I was experiencing anxiety that made everything feel worse. I started to protest, but she held up her hand and kept going. She said the foundation issues were real, Alexia confirmed that, but my reaction to them was extreme, and that wasn't my fault, but it was something I needed to address. I felt defensive and tired, and somewhere under that, I knew she was probably right, even though I didn't want to admit it. My phone buzzed and I grabbed it, hoping for something to change the subject. It was Kelly asking if she could come get some clothes. I stared at the text, trying to figure out what to say, how to respond to my wife who I'd accused of gaslighting me, and who had run out of the house in fear. I typed back that she could come, but asked if we could talk when she did. She said yes, and suggested tomorrow morning when Jillian would still be here. I felt grateful for that because I didn't trust myself to stay calm alone with her. That night, Jillian and I pulled up the corrupted camera files on my laptop, and she called a friend who did data recovery work. He connected remotely and ran some program that scanned the files while we watched progress bars inch across the screen. After about 20 minutes, he said the corruption pattern looked like SD card failure, something about wear leveling and bad sectors. Not deliberate tampering, just a cheap card dying at the worst possible time. It didn't prove Kelly wasn't in the hallway that night, but it removed the conspiracy angle I'd been building in my head. I thanked him and closed the laptop and sat there feeling stupid and paranoid and confused about what was real anymore. I barely slept that night, even though Jillian was in the next room and the house felt safer with her there. I kept running through every interaction with Kelly over the past weeks, trying to pinpoint when things shifted from normal to wrong. Was it the house changing, or was it me changing, becoming suspicious and paranoid about someone who had been my partner for years? I remembered the way she looked at me when I grabbed her phone, genuine fear in her eyes, and felt sick. I remembered her trying to get me to see a doctor and me refusing because I thought she was trying to make me look crazy. What if she was just worried about me, and I turned that into evidence of betrayal? Morning came too fast and too slow at the same time. Kelly knocked instead of using her key, and that small thing made my chest hurt. We sat in the living room with Jillian between us like a buffer, and Kelly looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, and her hair pulled back messy. She started talking before I could, apologizing for running but saying she was terrified by how I grabbed her phone and the wildness in my eyes when I accused her of shrinking the house. Her voice cracked when she said it, and I saw her hands shaking in her lap. I apologized for scaring her and for the surveillance camera, admitting that was a violation of trust, even though I felt desperate for answers at the time. Kelly started crying and said she had been measuring things and talking to her dad, Fred, because she noticed cracks in the basement months ago. She didn't want to worry me about expensive repairs when money was already tight, so she was trying to get information first. She pulled out her phone with hands that were still shaking and showed me photos of basement cracks I had never noticed, long, thin lines in the concrete that looked bad even to my untrained eye. Then she showed me text exchanges with Fred going back weeks, asking about foundation repair costs and whether insurance would cover it. She said she was trying to protect me from stress, not gaslight me or make me think I was crazy. I looked at the evidence on her phone and felt my whole theory about her collapse, because this was real documentation with timestamps and everything. The tools in her car were Fred's that she borrowed to check things herself. The late-night phone calls were her crying to her mom about being scared and not knowing what to do. The tape measure in the basement was her trying to figure out how bad the cracks were getting. Every piece of evidence I'd built my case on had a completely different explanation than the one I'd created in my paranoid spiral. I looked at Kelly sitting there with her phone showing me all this evidence, and I felt anger boiling up in my chest, because even if she was trying to help, the sneaking around made everything 10 times worse. She saw my face change and pulled back like I might yell at her. Jillian put her hand up between us like a referee stopping a fight. She said we needed to focus on moving forward instead of tearing apart the past, asking what we needed to do about the house and what we needed to do about us as a couple. Kelly started crying harder and said there was something else she had to tell me. My stomach dropped, because what else could there possibly be? She admitted she'd been putting something in my coffee every morning for the past 3 weeks. A mild sedative that her friend who works at urgent care suggested when she told him I wasn't sleeping and was acting paranoid. I stood up so fast the chair tipped over behind me. Kelly flinched and Jillian moved closer to her. I felt like the floor was tilting because this was exactly what I'd suspected, exactly what I'd pretended not to notice, and she'd actually been drugging me. Kelly was sobbing now, saying she knew it was wrong, but she was so scared watching me fall apart, and she didn't know what else to do. She said the doctor friend told her it was basically Benadryl strength, nothing dangerous, just something to help me rest. But all I could think about was swallowing those pills, thinking I was being paranoid when I was actually right. Jillian made us both sit back down and said we needed ground rules for this conversation right now. No more secrets starting immediately, everything on the table no matter how bad it looked, and we focus on solutions instead of blame. She looked at Kelly and said, "The sedatives stop today, no exceptions and complete honesty from now on." Then she looked at me and said, "No more cameras or surveillance, and if I'm struggling, I say it out loud instead of investigating in secret." Kelly agreed through her tears, and I nodded because I knew Jillian was right, even though I wanted to keep being angry. We called Alexia right there from the living room and scheduled her to come back for a full inspection in 2 days. Kelly said her dad, Fred, should stay out of it completely to avoid any appearance of covering things up or conflict of interest. I said I would see a therapist about the anxiety and checking behaviors that clearly got out of control. Kelly packed a bag while Jillian and I sat in the kitchen not talking. I heard her moving around upstairs, and it felt like she was already gone. She came down with a small suitcase and said she'd stay at her parents' for a few more days while we waited for Alexia's report. Jillian hugged her, and Kelly looked at me like she wanted me to say something, but I didn't know what to say. She left through the front door, and I watched her car pull away. The house felt huge and empty suddenly. Jillian made me sit down and started looking up therapists on her laptop. She found one named Reed, who specialized in anxiety disorders, and had an opening later that week. The space apart felt necessary, like we both needed room to breathe, but it also felt lonely in a way that surprised me. I kept expecting to hear Kelly in the other room or see her coming down the stairs. Jillian stayed with me for 2 more nights, and I realized how much I missed Kelly, even though I was still hurt and confused about everything. The morning of my first therapy appointment, I almost canceled 3 times. Jillian drove me there because she didn't trust me to actually go. Reed's office was in a boring medical building with gray carpet and paintings of beaches on the walls. He was younger than I expected, maybe 40, with glasses and a calm way of moving that made the room feel quieter. I sat in a chair across from him and told him everything. The doorways, the measurements, Kelly with the tape measure, the corrupted camera footage, getting stuck in the bathroom, the sedatives in my coffee, all of it including the parts that made me sound crazy. He listened without interrupting and took a few notes. When I finished, he said hypervigilance and checking behaviors often develop when someone feels their environment is unpredictable or unsafe. He explained that my brain might be amplifying normal sensory input because I was in a heightened threat state, making small changes feel big and dangerous. I said that sounded like he was calling me paranoid in a nice way. He said no, he was explaining how anxiety works and why my felt experience didn't match measured reality. He taught me a technique for distinguishing between what I feel is happening and what I can verify is actually happening. It felt patronizing at first, like he was teaching me something obvious, but when I tried it, I realized I couldn't actually tell the difference most of the time. My feelings about the doorways felt exactly as real as the measurements Jillian took. Reed said that was normal, and we'd work on it. I left feeling slightly less crazy, but also exhausted from talking about everything. 2 days later, Alexia's full report arrived by email. Jillian and I read it together on my laptop. Foundation heaved from poor drainage around the house, causing uneven shifting that made door frames bind and stick in their openings. The settling was gradual but real, measured in small increments that added up over months. Repairs would cost around $15,000, but were straightforward. Improve drainage with proper grading and gutters, install support posts in the basement, rehang doors that were binding. I called Kelly, and we talked for the first time since she left. There was relief in both our voices having a clear explanation that didn't involve either of us being crazy or evil. She said she'd been so scared the foundation was failing and we'd lose the house. I said I'd been scared I was losing my mind. We agreed to meet with a financial planner to figure out how to pay for repairs without destroying our savings. Kelly said something else that surprised me. She said we should also see a couples therapist, because even with explanations for everything, we broke trust with each other in serious ways. I agreed, because I realized fixing the house wouldn't fix us automatically. We needed help rebuilding what got damaged between us. The sedatives, the surveillance, the accusations, the secrecy, all of it left marks that wouldn't disappear just because we understood the doorways now. Regina's office had soft lighting and 2 chairs facing each other at an angle, not quite confrontational, but not side by side either. Kelly and I sat down, and Regina asked us to describe what brought us here, and I started talking about the doorways, but Regina stopped me and said she wanted to hear about us, not the house. Kelly said we stopped talking honestly and started protecting each other instead, and Regina nodded and asked what that protection looked like. I explained how Kelly hid the foundation concerns to avoid stressing me, and Kelly explained how I installed cameras and accused her of terrible things because I couldn't trust her reassurances. Regina pointed out that we both withheld information thinking we were helping, but the secrecy made everything worse and turned us into opponents instead of partners. Kelly started crying when she talked about watching me get thinner and more paranoid, checking measurements and barely sleeping, and how helpless she felt trying to convince me nothing was wrong when she knew something actually was wrong with the house. I cried too, admitting how abandoned I felt every time she dismissed what I was experiencing, like she was choosing to gaslight me instead of believing me. Regina let us cry and didn't rush to fix anything, just handed us tissues and said these feelings were important and real, even though the story we'd built around them turned out to be wrong. Reed gave me a notebook at our next session and explained the homework assignment. Track anxiety levels every few hours on a scale of 1 to 10. Note physical symptoms like racing heart or tight chest. Write down what was happening right before the anxiety spiked, and note what helped calm me down if anything did. I thought it sounded simple, but when I actually started doing it, I realized how much my anxiety fluctuated throughout the day. Mornings were terrible, waking up with my heart already pounding before I was fully conscious. Anxiety sitting at 7 or 8 before I even got out of bed. Late at night was almost as bad. Lying in bed with my mind racing through worst-case scenarios, checking and rechecking things I'd already verified. But during the day when I was focused on concrete tasks like helping Jillian organize her garage or researching foundation repair companies, my anxiety dropped to 3 or 4. Reed reviewed my tracking after a week and showed me the patterns I couldn't see while I was in it. The anxiety wasn't random or constant. It responded to specific triggers and situations, which meant I could learn to manage it instead of just enduring it. The sleep techniques Reed taught me actually started working after about 10 days of consistent practice. Progressive muscle relaxation, where I tensed and released each muscle group, breathing exercises that slowed my heart rate, and a routine that signaled to my brain it was safe to sleep. I got 6 hours of uninterrupted sleep 3 nights in a row, then 7 hours, then almost 8. The improvement made everything feel slightly less terrible, like I'd been operating with weights strapped to my body and someone finally removed them. Jillian called every morning to check in, and when I told her about the full night of sleep, she actually cheered on the phone. She started celebrating other small wins too, like when I told her I'd gone 2 full days without measuring any doorways or checking to see if walls had moved. She said these weren't small wins at all. They were huge victories over the anxiety patterns that had taken over my life. Her enthusiasm felt good, instead of patronizing, because she'd seen me at my worst and knew how hard I was working to get better. Kelly and I met with the insurance adjuster in a bland office with motivational posters about protecting what matters. The adjuster reviewed Alexia's report and our policy details, asked some questions about when we first noticed problems and what we'd done about them. He typed notes into his computer and finally said, "Our policy covered foundation repairs with our deductible of $2,000, which meant insurance would pay the remaining $13,000. I felt tension. I didn't know I was holding release from my shoulders and chest. Kelly reached over and took my hand, the first time we'd touched in weeks, and I squeezed back. Her hand felt fragile in mine, or maybe mine felt fragile in hers, something breakable between us that we were both trying not to crush. The adjuster kept talking about timelines and contractors and claim processing, but I was focused on Kelly's hand and the fact that we were sitting together dealing with this problem instead of separately accusing each other. It felt fragile but real, like something we could maybe rebuild if we were careful and honest. Fred called 2 days later and asked if he could talk to me, and I almost said no, but Kelly encouraged me to hear him out. He apologized for not being more direct from the beginning about his concerns, said he saw the cracks in settling, but Kelly asked him to let her handle it her way. He thought he was respecting her autonomy and their relationship, but he realized now he should have talked to both of us directly instead of going through Kelly. I told him I understood family dynamics are complicated and he was trying to support his daughter, but the secrecy fed my paranoia and made me suspect conspiracy instead of concern. We talked for almost an hour about communication and family patterns, how Kelly learned from her parents to handle problems quietly without involving others until solutions were ready. Fred said that approach worked for some things, but clearly failed here, and he'd encourage Kelly to be more transparent going forward. The conversation felt awkward, but honest, and I appreciated him taking responsibility instead of defending his choices. Donovan showed up at the house with pizza and beer, and I updated him on everything that happened since he hit his head on the basement ceiling. He listened to the whole story about Alexia's findings and the therapy and Kelly's sedatives, and when I finished, he admitted he'd been worried I was having a complete breakdown. He said he told his wife he thought I might need to be hospitalized because the things I was saying sounded so paranoid and disconnected from reality. But hearing that there were actual structural problems and Kelly actually was being secretive made him feel relieved that I wasn't just losing my mind for no reason. We laughed about both of us hitting our heads on things, how we'd become the family members who couldn't navigate doorways properly, and the laughter felt good after weeks of tension and fear. Donovan said he was proud of me for getting help instead of spiraling further, and I told him I was grateful he validated my experience, even when it sounded crazy. Reed and I spent the next therapy session exploring why I jumped straight to believing Kelly was deliberately harming me instead of considering other explanations. He asked about previous relationships and whether I'd experienced betrayal or manipulation before, and I found myself talking about an ex from years ago who actually did gaslight me. She'd move my things and deny it, tell me I said things I never said, convince me my memory was faulty when really she was lying to cover her own behavior. That relationship ended badly and left me with trust issues I thought I'd worked through, but Reed helped me see how that history colored my perception of Kelly's behavior. When Kelly was secretive and dismissive, my brain pulled up old patterns and assumed malicious intent instead of considering she might be scared or trying to protect me. Reed said this was a normal trauma response, my brain trying to protect me from being hurt again, but it made me see threats where there weren't any and damaged a relationship with someone who actually loved me. Kelly and I talked on the phone about next steps for the house, and she suggested we temporarily move to a furnished rental while repairs happened. The idea of leaving the house felt like relief and failure at the same time, but she pointed out we both needed space from the place that became the center of our crisis. We could stay with family, but that felt too close, too many questions and concerned looks. A short-term rental would give us privacy and distance to keep working on us while contractors fixed the foundation. We spent 2 days packing together, and the process was tense but different from before. We checked in about decisions instead of making assumptions, asked each other what we needed instead of trying to read minds, and took breaks when things felt too hard. Kelly asked if I wanted to pack the hidden camera, and I said no. I was leaving it behind with all the paranoia and surveillance. She nodded and said she was leaving the sedatives behind too, and we stood in the kitchen looking at each other, acknowledging we'd both done things we weren't proud of. The rental was a small apartment on the second floor of a modern building, furnished with generic but clean furniture that belonged to nobody. I walked through the doorways normally, not ducking or turning sideways, and realized I wasn't bumping into anything or hitting my head. Kelly noticed too, watching me move through the space easily, and we sat on the couch and acknowledged what we'd both been avoiding saying directly. The house problems were real. Alexia's measurements proved that. But my reaction was amplified by anxiety that made everything feel more dramatic and threatening. Kelly's secrecy was real too, the tape measures and conversations with Fred and sedatives in my coffee, but her motivation was fear and misguided protection, not malicious conspiracy. We were both right and both wrong, and sitting in the neutral apartment made it easier to admit that without defending ourselves or attacking each other. Regina had us do an exercise in our next session where we each wrote down our fears about the relationship on index cards, then shared them out loud. I stared at the blank card for a long time because putting fears into words made them more real somehow. Finally, I wrote that I was afraid Kelly would always see me as broken after this, the husband who accused her of shrinking the house and installed cameras and grabbed her phone. Kelly wrote on her card quickly and then sat holding it face down on her lap. Regina asked me to read mine first, and my voice shook, saying the words out loud. Kelly's eyes filled with tears, and she read hers next, saying she was afraid I'd never trust her again after the sedatives and secrecy, that I'd always be watching for signs she was lying or manipulating. We both cried, reading each other's fears, and realized we were scared of the same thing, that we'd damaged something that couldn't be repaired. Regina let us sit with that fear for a minute before saying that fear could be motivation to do the repair work, not proof the relationship was doomed. That session left us both raw, but also lighter somehow, like naming the fears took away some of their power. Kelly and I drove back to the rental separately, and I spent the evening on the couch thinking about what Regina said, how fear could push us to fix things, instead of proving they were broken forever. The next morning, I got a text from Alexia with a photo of a backhoe in our driveway, and the caption, "Drainage work begins today." I showed Kelly, and we both stared at the image for a long time, seeing actual proof that the problems were being addressed. Over the next week, Alexia sent daily updates, pictures of trenches being dug around the foundation, French drains being installed, gravel being laid. Each photo felt like progress I could see and touch, not just talk about in therapy. Kelly printed them out and put them on our rental fridge in chronological order, creating a visual timeline of the house being fixed. We'd stand there together looking at the sequence, not saying much, but both feeling like we were moving forward instead of being stuck in the nightmare of those weeks when everything felt wrong. I had my regular session with Reed on Thursday and sat in his office feeling nervous about something I needed to admit. He asked how things were going, and I told him about the therapy with Regina, about Kelly and I working on communication, about the house repairs starting. Then I took a breath and said I'd taken down the hidden camera weeks ago, but kept all the footage files on my laptop. Reed's expression didn't change, but he leaned forward slightly and asked what I was protecting myself from by holding on to that evidence. The question hit me hard, because I knew the answer. I just didn't want to say it out loud. I was still afraid of being wrong about Kelly's intentions, still clinging to the possibility that my paranoid theories were right, and the structural explanation was just an elaborate cover story. Reed asked if I truly believed that, and I said no, not anymore, but deleting the files felt like giving up proof of what I experienced. He pointed out that what I experienced was real anxiety and real fear, but the footage wasn't proof of Kelly's guilt. It was proof of my surveillance and mistrust. He asked if I was ready to let go of needing to be right about the conspiracy and choose to trust the evidence we had now, the engineer's report, and Kelly's explanations, and the actual foundation problems being fixed in those daily photos. I opened my laptop right there in Reed's office and found the folder with all the camera files. My hand shook, moving the cursor to the delete button, and I sat there for probably 2 full minutes just staring at it. Reed didn't push me or say anything, just waited while I worked through it internally. Finally, I clicked delete and then emptied the trash, watching the files disappear permanently. The relief was immediate and surprising, like I'd been carrying something heavy and finally set it down. Reed said this was a significant step in breaking the checking and surveillance pattern, that I was choosing to trust the present instead of clinging to paranoid theories from my worst moments. We talked about how the footage represented my attempt to control an uncontrollable situation, and deleting it meant accepting that I couldn't go back and prove anything. I could only move forward with what I knew now. That evening, Kelly and I had our best conversation yet, sitting on the rental couch with takeout Chinese food. Neither of us was really eating. I told her I'd deleted the camera footage, and she got quiet for a minute before saying thank you. Then she started talking about how my secrecy with the camera felt like a violation, like I'd turned our home into a place where she was watched and suspected. I listened without defending myself, and then said her secrecy about the foundation concerns and the tape measures, and especially the sedatives, felt like betrayal, like she didn't trust me to handle the truth. We went back and forth like that, being specific about individual actions instead of vague accusations. I apologized for installing the camera without her knowledge, and for grabbing her phone that day, naming the exact moments instead of just saying sorry for everything. Kelly apologized for the sedatives in my coffee, and for having those conversations with Fred without including me, and for dismissing my concerns about the doorways when I first brought them up. Regina had taught us to apologize for specific actions, and we were finally doing it, taking responsibility for particular choices instead of abstract wrongdoing. After we finished eating, I told Kelly about deleting the footage in Reed's office, and she thanked me again, then admitted something that made my chest tight. She said she'd been having nightmares about me grabbing her phone, about the look on my face in that moment, the rage and wildness in my eyes that made her scared of me for the first time in our marriage. I felt sick hearing it, but I didn't try to minimize or explain it away. I just said I was sorry, and that I'd been scared of her too in those worst moments. We held each other on the couch and acknowledged out loud that we'd both felt afraid of each other, that we'd both done things that damaged trust, that we'd both been at our worst when we needed to be at our best. It was the most honest we'd been since this whole thing started, and it hurt, but it also felt necessary, like lancing a wound, so it could finally heal properly. In our next session, Regina introduced something she called repair attempts, small actions that signal you're trying to reconnect after conflict. She said these didn't have to be big gestures, just consistent small things that show effort and attention. Kelly started bringing me coffee in bed the next morning, and we both laughed darkly when she handed it to me, acknowledging the sedative history, but also reclaiming the gesture as something caring instead of sinister. I started asking about her day when she got home from work, and actually listening to her answers instead of scanning for inconsistencies or lies. We'd catch each other doing these repair attempts, and sometimes acknowledge them directly, sometimes just let them happen naturally. Regina said this was exactly right, that rebuilding trust happened through accumulated small actions more than grand declarations. 2 weeks after repairs started, Alexia sent a text saying the major structural work was complete, and they were rehanging doors properly with the foundation now stabilized. She estimated another 2 weeks for finishing work and final inspection. Kelly and I sat at the rental kitchen table discussing whether to move back in right away or stay here longer. Part of me wanted to rush back and reclaim the house, prove I could live there normally now, but another part felt nervous about returning to the place where everything went wrong. Kelly said she felt the same way, wanting to go home, but also scared of falling back into old patterns. We agreed to wait until we both felt ready, not forcing it just because the repairs were done. Regina had talked about not rushing major decisions, and this felt like one of those times to be patient, even though patience was hard. The following week, Reed brought up something I'd been avoiding thinking about. He said I'd made excellent progress in therapy, but suggested I might benefit from medication for anxiety in addition to our sessions. My immediate reaction was resistance, and I told him about the coffee incident, about Kelly secretly dosing me. Reed nodded and said he understood that association, but explained the difference between prescribed medication I controlled versus someone secretly giving me substances. He said an SSRI could help lower my baseline anxiety and make the therapy tools more effective, that it wasn't about numbing me or controlling me, it was about giving my brain chemistry support while I did the psychological work. I sat with that for a while and asked questions about side effects and how long I'd need to take it and whether it meant I was broken or weak. Reed addressed each concern patiently and said medication wasn't about being broken, it was about using available tools to support recovery, like using crutches while a broken leg healed. By the end of the session, I agreed to try a low-dose SSRI and see how it went. I started the medication that weekend and the first week was rough. I felt nauseous and tired, had trouble sleeping even worse than before, felt foggy and disconnected. Reed had warned me about adjustment side effects and told me to push through the first week or two, unless things got unbearable. I texted him twice, feeling like I should stop, but he encouraged me to keep going, reminded me this was temporary while my brain adjusted. Kelly was supportive, asking how I felt each day, not pushing me to stick with it, but also reminding me what Reed said about the adjustment period. By week 2, the side effects faded, and I started noticing something different. My baseline anxiety was lower, like the constant hum of worry I'd been living with had decreased in volume. I wasn't constantly scanning the environment for threats, or checking doorways or looking for evidence of problems. I could walk through the rental apartment without that hyper-vigilant edge that had become so normal, I'd stopped noticing it. Reed asked me to rate my anxiety on a scale of 1 to 10 each day, and the numbers were consistently lower than they'd been in months, hovering around 3 or 4 instead of 7 or 8. The medication wasn't magic, and I still had anxious moments, but it felt like I had more space between stimulus and reaction, more room to use the tools Reed taught me, instead of being overwhelmed by immediate panic. 2 weeks after starting the medication, Kelly texted me that Alexia had confirmed the repairs were done and we could visit the house. I met Kelly there on a Saturday morning, and we stood in the driveway for a minute before going in, both of us nervous about what we'd feel walking back into the place where everything fell apart. She unlocked the front door, and I followed her inside, and the first thing I noticed was how normal the doorway felt when I walked through it. No ducking, no turning sideways, no bracing for impact. I walked straight through like I had for the first 8 years we'd lived here, before everything started. Kelly watched me, and I saw her eyes get wet, and then I walked through again just to feel it, the simple act of moving through a doorway without thinking about it. We went room to room together, and I tested every single doorway, hallway, and tight space that had caused me problems. The kitchen doorway where I'd first hit my head was perfectly normal. The bathroom doorway I'd gotten stuck in was wide enough. The hallway felt open instead of closing in. Kelly started crying for real when we got to the bedroom, and I walked through that doorway 3 times in a row without any issues. I started crying too because the relief was so strong it hurt, seeing physical proof that the problems were real, and now they were fixed. We stood in the bedroom holding each other and crying, and it wasn't about the house anymore. It was about being able to trust what we saw and felt, having evidence we could both see, instead of fighting about what was real. The next therapy session with Regina, she had us do an exercise about conflict that made me uncomfortable before we even started. She said we were going to have a disagreement right there in her office, about something real, using the tools we'd been learning. Kelly brought up that she wanted to refinish the basement now that the foundation was fixed, turn it into a proper living space, and I immediately felt my chest get tight because that would cost money we didn't have after the foundation repairs. Regina stopped me before I could say anything and had me use the breathing technique Reed taught me, counting to 4 on the inhale and 6 on the exhale. Then she had me state my concern without attacking or shutting down, just saying what I was worried about. I told Kelly I was scared about spending more money right now because our savings were low and I didn't want to go into debt. Kelly used her tool of acknowledging what I said before responding, repeating back that she heard I was worried about money and debt. Then she explained she'd been researching costs and had a plan to do the work in phases over 2 years, only spending what we could afford each phase. Regina had us keep going back and forth, each of us listening and acknowledging before responding, and it felt weird and formal at first, but we actually worked through the whole disagreement without either of us getting defensive or mean. By the end, we had a plan we both felt okay about, doing the basement in small, affordable steps, and Regina pointed out that we'd just successfully navigated a real conflict about money without anyone shutting down or attacking. It felt like a small miracle after months of terrible communication where every conversation turned into a fight or silent treatment. We decided that weekend to move back into the house together. Kelly had been staying with her parents, and I'd been in the rental apartment, and we both agreed it was time to reclaim our actual home instead of living in temporary spaces. It would feel strange at first. We knew that. All the bad memories were still there, even though the physical problems were fixed. But we wanted to make new memories in the house, good ones, instead of letting the worst period of our marriage be the last thing that happened there. Jillian offered to help us move back in and showed up with her truck full of boxes from my rental. We loaded everything into the house, and Jillian kept making jokes about the doorways, walking through them with her arms spread out measuring them, pretending to bump her head and fall over. Kelly and I both laughed, real laughs, because we could finally see some humor in how crazy everything had gotten. Jillian measured a doorway with her hands and announced it was definitely regulation size, and we all laughed harder because we'd spent so much time obsessing over measurements that had felt life or death serious. Moving our stuff back in felt good, putting things in their old places, making the house ours again instead of a crime scene we were investigating. The first night back in the house, I woke up at 2 in the morning in a full panic. My heart was racing and I couldn't remember where I was. Couldn't orient myself in the dark bedroom. For a second, I thought the walls were closer and the ceiling was lower, and I was back in that nightmare of everything shrinking. Kelly woke up when I sat up breathing hard, and she turned on the bedside lamp, and I saw her face in the familiar bedroom and started to calm down a little. She didn't ask what was wrong. She just started doing the calming technique we'd learned in therapy, talking me through slow breathing and grounding exercises. She had me name 5 things I could see, 4 things I could touch, 3 things I could hear, and by the time I got to 2 things I could smell, my heart rate was back to normal. I didn't get up to check measurements or look for evidence that something had changed. I didn't pull out my phone to compare the room to old photos. I just breathed and trusted that the house was fixed, that the panic was my brain's old pattern, not current reality. Kelly kept her hand on my back the whole time, and when I finally laid back down, she stayed awake with me until I fell asleep again. Fred came by the next morning to see the completed repairs. He walked through the whole house checking Alexia's work, running his hands along door frames and looking at where the foundation had been reinforced. When he finished his inspection, he apologized again for not being more direct with me from the start, said he should have told me about the foundation concerns instead of letting Kelly handle it alone. I told him I understood he was trying to support Kelly and respect her wishes, but going forward, we needed him to check in with both of us about house concerns. Fred agreed and said he'd learned his lesson about keeping secrets even with good intentions, that it had nearly destroyed our marriage, and he felt responsible. We established a new pattern right there, where Fred would text both Kelly and me if he noticed anything about the house that needed attention. No more side conversations or hidden consultations. It felt good to clear the air and set up better boundaries, turning Fred back into someone I could trust, instead of someone I suspected of helping Kelly gaslight me. I had my regular appointment with Reed later that week, and we talked about my progress over the past 3 months. He pulled out his notes and showed me the anxiety tracking charts I'd been keeping, pointing out how my numbers had gone from 7s and 8s down to 3s and 4s consistently. He said my checking behaviors were way down. I wasn't compulsively measuring things or looking for evidence of changes multiple times a day. The hypervigilance was still there sometimes, especially when I was tired or stressed, but I had tools now to manage it instead of letting it spiral into full panic. Reed said the combination of therapy and medication had been really effective for me, that I'd done the hard work of changing thought patterns and behaviors that had been making everything worse. I still had moments where I felt that old urge to check and verify everything, to not trust what I was seeing, but now I could recognize it as anxiety, not reality, and use my tools instead of acting on every worried thought. Reed said that was huge progress, and we could start spacing out our sessions to every other week. Kelly and I celebrated our anniversary the following weekend, quietly at home instead of going out. We decided to cook dinner together in the kitchen where this whole thing had started, the room where I'd first hit my head on the doorway and begun spiraling. We made pasta from scratch, something we used to do all the time before everything fell apart, working side by side at the counter. The kitchen felt normal, the space felt right, and I moved through it without constantly checking distances or bracing for impact. We opened a bottle of wine, and Kelly made a toast to surviving the worst period of our marriage and coming out stronger. I added that it felt earned, not naive, because we'd both done real work to get here instead of just hoping things would get better. We clinked glasses and drank and kept cooking, talking about normal things like what movie to watch later and whether we needed to buy a new lawnmower. The anniversary felt significant because we were choosing to stay together after seeing each other at our absolute worst, after breaking trust in serious ways, after nearly giving up completely. Regina told us in our next couples therapy session that we'd done excellent work and could move to monthly check-ins instead of weekly sessions. She said it felt like graduation. We'd learned the tools and were actually using them in daily life, communicating directly about problems instead of avoiding or attacking. Kelly and I were making decisions together now, checking in with each other about concerns before they became crises, rebuilding trust through small, consistent actions over time. Regina warned us we'd still have hard moments and setbacks. That wasn't going away, but we had a foundation now for working through problems together. She said, most couples never do the kind of deep work we'd done. They just coast along until something breaks, and then they don't have any tools to fix it. We left her office holding hands, and I felt proud of us for doing the hard thing instead of just walking away when everything got terrible. I had a follow-up appointment with Alexia a month after the repairs finished. She came back to inspect everything and confirm the work was holding up properly, checking the foundation supports and drainage system. She took measurements and photos and ran tests with her equipment, and when she finished, she said everything looked great. The foundation was stable, the drainage improvements were working exactly as designed, and the house should be solid for decades with normal maintenance. She said we'd caught the problems before they became truly catastrophic, before the foundation shifted enough to cause major structural damage. I felt grateful hearing that, grateful we'd gotten help when we did, grateful Jillian had pushed me to call a professional instead of just spiraling in paranoia. Alexia said to call her if we ever noticed any new cracks or settling, but she didn't expect problems given how thorough the repairs had been. Donovan and his family came over for dinner 2 weeks later. His wife and their 2 kids, ages 6 and 9, filled the house with normal family noise and energy. We cooked burgers on the grill, and the kids ran around the backyard and then through the house, in and out of rooms without hesitation. My niece ran full speed through the kitchen doorway that had caused me so much fear and pain, not even thinking about it, just a kid playing. Donovan and I talked about work and sports and regular life things, and the house never became the main topic of conversation. Nobody hit their head, nobody commented on doorways feeling tight or ceilings feeling low. It was just a normal family dinner in a normal house, and I realized partway through the evening that I was moving through the doorways the same way my niece was, without thinking about it, without checking or measuring or bracing for impact. The house was just a house again, not a threat or a mystery or a source of constant anxiety. It was the place Kelly and I lived, with a fixed foundation and properly hung doors, and that was enough. A week after that dinner, Kelly and I sat on our couch and talked about everything we learned from the crisis. She said she would never keep secrets to protect me from stress again, because the secrecy made everything worse and fed my paranoia instead of helping. I told her I would never jump to worst-case scenarios without checking facts first, that I let my anxiety build these massive conspiracy theories when I should have just asked her what was going on. We both agreed to ask questions instead of making assumptions, to talk directly about problems instead of hiding them or imagining them. It felt good to name those patterns out loud and commit to changing them together. 2 weeks later, I had a session with Reed where we discussed reducing my appointments from weekly to every other week. He said I had developed solid skills for managing anxiety and recognizing when I needed help, that I was doing the work and seeing real progress. The medication was still working well, and I was sleeping through the night for the first time in months, actually sleeping instead of lying awake checking measurements in my head. Reed said I should keep taking the medication and keep practicing the techniques we worked on, but I was ready to step back from weekly therapy. I felt proud hearing that, like I had actually fixed something important. 6 months after I first hit my head on that kitchen doorway, Kelly and I sat on our back deck watching a rainstorm. The new drainage system was working perfectly, water flowing away from the foundation exactly like it should. I watched the rain and felt genuinely peaceful for the first time since this whole thing started. The house was solid underneath us, the foundation stable and properly supported. Our marriage was stronger because we had learned how to communicate honestly instead of hiding things or imagining the worst. I realized sitting there that the scariest thing was never what was actually happening with the house. It was what I imagined in the absence of clear information and honest communication, the stories my anxious brain created to explain things I didn't understand. Kelly reached over and took my hand, and we just sat there together watching the rain, both of us knowing we had survived something hard and come out better for it. And that's the end of this story. I'm so glad you joined me, because it makes telling these feel meaningful. Hopefully it brought some light to your day. Subscribe so we can do it again soon.